While the Namek Saga had some of the most egregious power cliffing I've seen in Dragon Ball, where top tiers from the previous saga would be bottom tiers in the following arc, the Cell Saga isn't too far behind. Maybe it's how it treats its bottom tiers, but even the mid tiers of the Cell Saga feel insignificant compared to the peaks of the arc, when they were the actual peaks of the verse in just a previous saga. As always, this is a manga-only ranking that uses guidebooks and statements as secondary sources when applicable. No anime scaling here. I broke the characters into tiers S through F, and if any fell below F tier, they were excluded from mention in this video. This ranking starts from the time Cell is introduced, to Trunks' return to his timeline, and the elimination of future Cell. If you want to see how these characters stacked up before Cell arrived, check out my Android Saga video after this. There will be a link to the playlist in the description. With that said, let's get into the ranking. Breaking tradition, we're covering 3 characters at once. The human Z-Fighters were relegated to sideline observers in this arc, with Tien being the only one to do something, and all that amounted to was him almost dying in a dirty, semi-perfect Cell. Tien's Neo Tri-Beam still affected Cell more than Android 16's punch, which couldn't even move the guy, granting Tien superiority over the other humans. Maybe if he doesn't immediately get blitzed and bodied, he could do something against a full power Frieza with the attack. Krillin then sits just below him due to not having a busted super move he can pull out of nowhere, and Yamcha is below Krillin due to him kinda just playing second, or I guess third fiddle to Krillin and Tien all throughout the series. So we have Yamcha at 16th place, Krillin at 15th, and Tien at 14th place, making up the F tier for our ranking. This one might be controversial, but let me be clear, conceptually speaking, future Gohan is one of my absolute favorite characters in Dragon Ball, and if this was an anime ranking, he would be way higher. But the manga is just not kind to him, to the extent that I can only grant him an E tier placement in the 13th spot in the ranking. Future Trunks believed himself to be stronger than Gohan, to the point that he went and fought the androids despite knowing that they took him out. This Trunks is the one that had his sword strikes blocked by Yardrat Goku's finger and glazed him afterward. On top of this, right before Gohan's death, he concedes that he never surpassed his dad. While future Goku had about 2.5 years of training in him before dying of the heart virus, he was definitely not training as hard as his main timeline counterpart, who was preparing for the arrival of the androids. Given Trunks' belief that he surpassed Gohan and his own inferiority to Yardrat Goku, it is really hard to place Gohan above even Yardrat Goku in power. It's even worse when you take into account that a future Android 17, who was even weaker than his main timeline counterpart, wasn't even using half of his power against Gohan. Granted, this was the fight where Gohan lost his arm, and he had a whole year to train before their final battle, so it's possible that he grew in power to at least rival 50% of a future Android 17, but that's nothing compared to the people above him in the list. Speaking of abysmal stats, only 3.8% of you are actually subscribed to this channel. If you appreciate my willingness to put one of my favorite characters at the bottom of E tier, consider subscribing so you don't miss the Buu Saga breakdown. Android 19 technically shows up in a little supplementary chart detailing the history of the androids alongside Gero. I didn't want Gohan to be lonely in E tier, so I decided to include them. I cover Android 19 scaling in more depth in my Android Saga ranking video, but basically a sick Goku that was at worst still stronger than himself from 3 years ago overwhelmed 19, but couldn't deal any significant damage to him. 19 only needed to absorb a single blast from Goku to multiply his power and overwhelm him. 19 also tanked a bunch of attacks from a full power Super Saiyan Vegeta before being taken out, and could even draw blood from him. Against Gohan, who's even weaker than Yardrat Goku, Android 19 would be able to tank his attacks even better than he did against Goku. Even if 19 starts at a lower level of power than Gohan, his durability is shown to be excellent, and he only needs to absorb a single key attack to overpower him. Gero's just stated to be blatantly superior to 19, granting him the 11th spot, while 19 sits at 12th. D tier consists of only Android 18 and 17, a drastic fall from their previous spots as the third and second strongest from the Android Saga, and A tier combatants. 17 earns the 9th spot over 18 due to him having a respectable showing against Piccolo, who fused with Kami, even outpacing him in their fight due to his force field and infinite stamina. 18 only ever fights pre-Time Chamber Vegeta, and while she destroyed him, 17 notes that she likely couldn't take on Vegeta, pre-fusion Piccolo, Trunks, and the humans all at once. I kind of doubt that given just how easily she and her brother took them out, but that, along with her never showing the ability to use a force field and being stated to have suppressed power compared to her brother, gives the impression that while she sits in a similar realm of power to him, she is not as strong as 17, so she very solidly rounds out our top 10. Because of how the power escalation and tiering works in this arc, C tier only contains one character, that being Android 16, the former #1 strongest character from the previous arc. He stands as an exact equal to Imperfect Cell, being capable of dealing significant damage to him and taking his hits much better than the likes of Android 17 or Piccolo, who got his neck broken and the hole blasted through him. Given 16's relativity to Cell, he could likely do the exact same thing against 17 and 18 if it ever came down to a fight. This puts Android 16 in this weird spot where he doesn't really have any equals in the arc. He gets stomped by everyone above him, and he stomps everyone below him. Therefore, he is C tier. Kicking off B tier and maintaining his 7th place ranking from the previous list, we have Piccolo. His power that was almost on level with the Super Saiyans grew by leaps and bounds after fusing with Kami, putting him on an equal if not greater level of power with Android 17. If that was the whole story, then he'd be down in D tier with them, fighting with 18 for the 10th spot due to his limited stamina. However, he gains an extra year of training in preparation for the Cell games, improving his power to the extent that even Goku took notice. You might be wondering how much stronger he got, and what about his training earned him a B tier ranking though? Well, we can see in the little bit we see of his fight against the Cell Juniors that Piccolo is the only one, aside from Trunks and Vegeta, that is still standing. We aren't using the anime, so I won't claim that Piccolo was fighting on at all even terms with his Cell Junior, but him still standing is very telling of the power that he achieved. He's at the very least stronger than post-Cell fight Goku, who was getting destroyed by his Cell Junior. While Goku was exhausted, even half of his power eclipsed Vegeta's before he went into Time Chamber for a second round of training, and he was stomping semi-perfect Cell. It's difficult to say how much strength Goku lost in his fight with Cell. He was panting near the end, but he didn't seem all that tired after catching his breath. He probably dropped below 50%, but I don't see him going any lower than like 20%. I don't know, tell me what you think in the comments. Anyway, it wouldn't make sense for a Cell Jr. to hold back enough to leave Piccolo standing, and at least capable of somewhat defending himself, when they broke Yamcha's arm, tortured Krillin, seemingly knocked Tien out, and had Goku laid out. They were trying to dominate and torture here, but have a drawn-out, pitched battle. They couldn't do that to Trunks and Vegeta, and it seems like they also couldn't do it to Piccolo. So while Piccolo obviously sits narratively below Trunks and Vegeta, he is still in their ballpark, granting him a B- ranking, just like his Android Saga ranking. 6th place is Trunks. His scaling is pretty blatant, as he's often put on a similar level to Vegeta, just below the prince himself in power. Vegeta says so, and when the Cell Juniors jump the Z Fighters, Trunks is the only one, aside from Vegeta, who's pointed out by Cell as holding his own. He had a whole extra year of training in the Time Chamber in preparation for the Cell games, but just like his father, who ranks above him, it was not enough to even become a factor in the fight against Cell. Still, Trunks is clearly above Piccolo, since he was actually stated to be holding his own against the Cell Junior. We do see a Trunks that is 3 years post-Cell games in the chapter where he kills his timeline Cell, and while he has likely surpassed Cell games Vegeta at this point, his power here is entirely speculative and not the version of Trunks that we see for most of the arc. Still, if you want to put Trunks above Vegeta, you can if you use this version of him. Vegeta sits at 5th place, and for a brief period of time, he was actually the strongest character in the verse, severely outclassing Semi-Perfect Cell in their fight. Against the suppressed Perfect Cell, he even managed to vaporize a good bit of his arm and torso. However, given Cell's regeneration and following mockery of Vegeta, it's likely that Cell just took the attack to prove that Vegeta can't kill him and further harm his pride. Following this, Vegeta spends an extra year in the Time Chamber and is said to have improved, but given his deference to Goku, it's unlikely that he even surpassed half of Goku's power, which is all he felt from him until the Cell games. Still, Cell noted that he was holding his own against the Cell Jr., which is more than anyone else in the Z Fighters can claim, aside from Trunks and maybe Piccolo. Vegeta trumps Trunks due to him likely still holding an edge in power and his skill and experience generally being greater, as seen with the Grade 3 Super Saiyan fiasco. At the top of B tier, the Cell Juniors sit at 4th place. We see in the manga that they're more than a match for the humans, Piccolo, a tired Goku, and even had the upper hand against Trunks and Vegeta. Daizenshuu does claim that these guys are roughly equal to Cell in terms of speed and power, but from what we see in the manga, this claim might be dubious. I think even Daizenshuu realized that this statement was bogus because they later contradicted it in a more recent issue, saying that these things were equal to Vegeta and Trunks in strength. Since Vegeta was able to land a solid punch on a Cell Jr. and actually make it bleed, I'm inclined to believe that they are closer to Trunks or Vegeta than they would be to Cell. These things were meant to torture and torment the Z Fighters. If they were even in the ballpark of Cell's power, Vegeta would not be landing any hits on them, much less make them bleed. Still, given the state that Vegeta and Trunks were in compared to the Cell Juniors, who looked to be in pretty good health, they more than earned their 4th place spot in the B+ ranking. As our sole A tier, Goku stands head and shoulders above the rest of the Z Fighters, aside from Gohan, of course. He completely shocked Vegeta and Trunks with only half his power, and completely shocked them again, even after they got an extra year of training with his full power. Still, Goku is clearly weaker than Cell and a Gohan who didn't want to fight, to the extent that in his fight against Cell, Goku fought his suppressed power, being pushed to the limit and failing to take Cell down to a level that he would be able to beat even if he were to eat a senzu bean to get back to full health. That said, Goku represents a level of power that is thought to be unattainable to the rest of the cast, and his instant transmission grants him a level of travel speed that none of those below him can hope to match, such that even if someone like Vegeta or Cell Jr. were to approach or surpass him in power, a full power Warp Kamehameha would completely turn the tides in his favor. Unfortunately, Goku is an ant compared to the top two of this list, locking him at 3rd place for the Cell Saga. This is the first time in one of these where I feel like I actually have to argue that a character doesn't deserve 1st place. In his perfect form alone, Cell trumps almost everyone in the arc, far surpassing Goku, Vegeta, and Trunks to the extent that he could have taken all 3 of them out at the same time. He's so strong that he can give birth to multiple B-tier level beings with seemingly no drop in power. There's no implication that he caps out at the 7 that he created. He knows the signature technique of every Z fighter and villain that we've seen, and using them as if they're his own, and if he really felt like it, he could even use the Spirit Bomb. That's all just for his perfect form, by the way. He comes back even stronger as Super Perfect Cell with instant transmission on top of his new level of power. Easily S tier. In this state, he broke Gohan's arm with a Ki Blast that was meant to kill Vegeta and went on to Beam Clash with him, where he initially held the advantage before eventually being overwhelmed. The thing is, Cell did lose that beam struggle. Sure, he got distracted by a blast from base Vegeta, but he was also clashing for an extended period of time against a one-armed Gohan that was self-claimed to be at half power while also holding back not to destroy the planet. Cell was at full HP here, while Gohan was still sporting injuries from his initial scuffle with Cell, as well as a broken arm and awful mental state. Maybe you could argue that Cell was stronger than an injured Gohan, but even that injured Gohan eventually overwhelmed him the moment his focus slipped. Gohan is simply the strongest. The narrative surrounding his power is immense, with his calm state eclipsing Goku's full strength to the extent that Gohan was utterly unimpressed by his father and thinking that he was surely holding back against Cell. When it was his turn against Cell, despite not having his heart in the fight, Gohan evaded most of Cell's attacks, tanking the ones that did land pretty well. He then laid him out with a kick, the only attack Gohan bothered throwing during the entire fight. Upon unlocking Super Saiyan 2 and no longer holding back, Gohan made a complete joke out of Cell. You know how the rest of this goes. Eventually Cell blows himself up, takes Goku with him, and somehow survives, getting a Zenkai as well, and breaking Gohan's arm. Real quick about the arm break, Gohan's mental was in the trash here. His dad just died, and he jumped to protect Vegeta from a blast meant to kill without thinking. Even after tanking the blast, we get monologue from him saying that he underestimated the power that Cell put behind that blast. He had very little time to prepare himself to tank the attack, and he was caught off guard by its power. Despite that, only his arm got busted up. He still vaporized Cell with the one arm that still worked. If he was back at full health like Cell was, the fight wouldn't have even been close. It's Gohan, not Cell, who's used as a benchmark of power even in the Buu Saga. Piccolo, Vegeta, and Goku aren't comparing everyone to Cell's post-Zenkai power, they're comparing them to Gohan's power from this arc. It is for that reason that Gohan earns the #1 spot on this list, sitting at the top of S tier. But yeah, that's how the ranking of the Cell Saga shakes out. I have the tier list on the screen now, so you can kind of see it from like a holistic point of view. If you liked what you saw here, consider subscribing so you can be notified when the Buu Saga ranking comes out. And hey, if this is the first video you're seeing from me, there's a playlist in the description with rankings for the Saiyan, Namek, and Android sagas that you might be interested in. But yeah, no, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.